2021 technically will be the 100th anniversary of the first state tournament, and I've been working on this project for a book, and my family, my wife a few months ago said, was hearing me in a conversation with a coach, and I told her, you know, I've done over 300 interviews, I've got over 30,000 articles and documents, and you know, and I've been under the basket over years taking photos. I got close to 500,000, and you know, after the conversation, she says, "Well, what's the big deal?" And he says, "Well, it's a lot of work," and she goes, "Well, the only one that can see it is you." And then one of the interviews I did in November that a lot of you from the New Mexico Activity Association know is, and probably the longest historian of high school basketball is Chuck Ferris. And Chuck interviewed, and Chuck's up in age, he's up in his 80s, and Chuck said, "I wish somebody would continue my website." You know, he's accumulated so much data on coaches and in high schools, and so it got me thinking. And then a few friends that have sold books before, because I've never done a book before, and this is my first venture of doing a book, they suggested I do it on my website instead of doing it, you know, through Amazon and so forth. So in December, I talked to Chuck, and he agreed to combine his data. And so as a result, I checked with some website vendors, including, you know, I've been part of the New Mexico Sports Hall of Fame, and checked with our website guy, and he was obviously the one that recommended that I go to GoDaddy. And so since December 10th, I officially started the initial draft. It's been a long process, but hopefully it's going to be a site that has a lot of archive information for the last over 100 years, probably starting in the late 1890s and stuff. So we hope it's going to be a lot of articles, photos. I've gotten a lot of schools donating high school games, some big-time games, and you know, hopefully be a good place for basketball junkies here in New Mexico.
What prompted this passion project?
You know what? Back in August of, you know, I've always been, I loved history. You know, that was probably my favorite subject in high school. You know, and I've been on the New Mexico Sports Hall of Fame for the last 12 years. And my curiosity, back in December of 2012, I had two really great players, Cullen Neal and Bryce Alford. And it was toward the end of the month of right before Christmas. I said, man, Bryce is off to averaging like 40 points a game. I wonder where he stacks up in the state records, and Cullen in the state records. And I looked at the state records, and their name wasn't anywhere. I said, what do you mean it's not anywhere? And so I said, I called the NMA, and he says, well, we've had nothing submitted from El Dorado or La Cueva. So I called my good friends Frank Castillo and Roy Sanchez, and they had no idea. And so, but they said, I'll just send you the material. I said, I'll call the parents, and they didn't have ideas. So they sent me all the material, and between Christmas and New Year's, I figured out where they stood. At that time, Cullen had 1,552 points career-wise, and Bryce had 1,535. And I said, if they stay on this pace, they could become the all-time leading career scorers. And then Bryce, the way he started off that year, I said he could be on pace to break a state record. And Coach Steve Alford at the time was at UNM, and he says, well, I don't want you to share any of the results. You tell me. And at that time, I didn't want to get any mad, because Danny Granger at the time was sponsoring our AAU basketball club, and a call from Steve Alford would probably have ended that. And so I said, Steve, I have some bad news. Is last year Cullen had 831 points, and Bryce had 830. So and those would have been, now my research, those would have been an APS record. That would have broken a record from 1981 by a guy named Phil Rohr from Cibola. But nobody knew that. And so, in fact, I couldn't even say nothing until, in fact, the next game was the Metro tournament, and Bryce has 40 points and Cullen has 23, and now they're tied. So no one could say, I didn't say anything. And then at the end of January, Bryce has a big game in Clovis, breaks the 2,000 mark, which very few players have done. And I called Steve. I said, he needs 6 points to break Marcus Williams' record. It would be a shame that nobody knows about it. And so I sent the press release out, And I happened to be in Colorado at a State Farm meeting, so I had to watch the game on ProViews, and sure enough, Bryce in the first few minutes breaks the record, and he becomes it. Turns out later that Marcus Williams wasn't the most. It was a guy named Michael Maya from Valley. And so the sad part was that, that Michael didn't get recognized as a top player from the Metro. And then toward the end of the season, I get a call from a guy from Bosque Farms and says, the guy that Bryce is chasing, Isaac Benaramo from Hagerman, he's not the all-time guy, and I can prove it. So he came to my office, brought me scorebooks from 8th grade to 12th grade, and we added up all the points, and Alfred Romero Jr. from Wagaman had more points. I said, well, you got to get this stuff over to the New Mexico Activities Association. And so about 2 weeks before the state tournament, they put the numbers out there, because it sure would have been a shame that, if Bryce would have kept another game or two, he needed another game, could have broken the record. And so I started looking at stats, and I had a really good team that year. I had kids like Sam Haywood and Andres Rivera. I started looking at our kids, and they were in the top 10 of a lot of the NMA records. And so that's what kind of got me going about state records. And then in 2017, I'm part of a group on Facebook called Basketball History New Mexico. It was started by former Albuquerque Journal writer Ben Moffitt. And I post all my findings, and he goes, how much stuff do you have? This was in 2017. And I said, oh, I don't know, I got about 3,000 or 4,000 articles. He goes, how much? And so we had a long discussion, and he kind of convinced me to write some books, but he also convinced me to meet Chuck Ferris. He said, you need to meet Chuck. And then Chuck recommended I get with the NMA. And so the idea was to get all the basketball programs, and we got all the basketball from 1945 to 2017. And then I went camping for 6 days. I was going camping anyways. And so I was looking through all these programs, and I started finding all these articles and people. I said, nobody knows about these people. And so that's where I was going to do 4 books, one on coaches, one on scorers, one on big men, and one on playmakers. And then my mother died in 2017, and I didn't do nothing on it until last February. Somebody called me for a photo from 2004, and I found the photo. I said, man, I got all this stuff. And also in early 2000, January, I decided to stop doing AU basketball. I had an AU program for 20-some years. I had my good friend Alvin Metters had passed away in September 2019. And so now what am I going to do for the spring? No more AU basketball tournaments. I got to do honeydew stuff, yard work. And so I started posting stuff on Facebook. So that's been my testing ground. And then something hit me. I said, I'm going to do each year. And technically the first year of a sanctioned tournament was 1921. So 2021, that's 100 years. Maybe I just do one book. And so and in June, I decided to get a cameraman from ProView Networks, Dana Childs, and we decided to go across the state and interview coaches, players, sportscasters, sports writers, and so it's led us to where I am today.
You tackle this project of putting together a book about the history of basketball in New Mexico, which no one's ever done. What was the most revealing or eye-opening story you've come across in all the thousands of people you've talked to?
You know, I think the development of Hobbs basketball. You know, what Ralph Tasker had to do to develop Hobbs basketball. Prior to 1954, there was no black players on the Hobbs team. All the black athletes went to Booker T. Washington High School. And then the Supreme Court decision, Little Rock versus the school board, changed segregation. And so it closed down Booker T. Washington. So a lot of the great players, in fact, Ralph Tasker used to go watch those players and say, my kids can't beat those guys. And unfortunately, Booker T. Washington was not allowed in the New Mexico Activities Association. So there was like a little league of high schools in Clovis and Roswell that were all black that had their own little league. And so great players like Bill Bridges, who went on to play in the NBA. In fact, I think he's the most accomplished player ever to come out of New Mexico. He led Hobbs in 57 and 58 to a state title, went on to the University of Kansas. His jersey's retired. In fact, the top rebounder each year is named the Bill Bridges. It's not the Will Chamberlain or any other big man that they've had out of Kansas. It's the Bill Bridges. And then he went on to play for 13 years. So, so him handling that segregation, and then how did the press start? Because the early years, Ralph Tasker at Lovington and at Hobbs did not press. They'd press only when they needed to, and it was Kim Nash, a white guy, that at Christmas break says, "Coach, we play better when we press. Let's press the whole game." And so he got the guys oil-filled boots, and during the Christmas break, they got in shape and said, "We're going to press for 32 minutes, regardless of the score." And so to me, that was probably the most intriguing part of it. Plus the rule changes was pretty intriguing.
All kinds of scoring records and stories and history of basketball in New Mexico. What do you hope that someone takes away from this book in reading it?
Well, I think, my focus is going to be on the positive accomplishments. There's a lot of great accomplishments that people don't know about basketball. And basketball, as I traveled, one common thing is the love of the game. No matter whether it's a small community, big town, the love of the game is big. And I see the synergy that's occurred on Facebook, old guys talking about basketball with the newer guys, and just the camaraderie. So hopefully the positive accomplishments, and probably a great example that I found in one of those programs was a guy named Herman Gallegos from Pecos High School. I'm looking at 1955, and there's a one-page article on Herman Gallegos. I look at all the programs, and even today, I don't remember NMA writing an article on a current high school player about his season. Unfortunately, Pecos High School didn't make the state tournament, but it had every point total, and he's the first person I could find that scored 40 points in a game, and he's the first person to score 50 points. He had a 56-point game. That 56-point game would be a top 10 still here in the NMA, but his name has never appeared on there. And so when I interviewed him up at Pecos, there was a lot of the younger guys that they won 4 state titles, and so I asked all the young guys before I started interviewing, I said, "Who's the top scorer ever in a game?" And they named all these guys. I said, "No, it's Mr. Gallegos." And Herman Gallegos has been a basketball official for 30 plus years up there. He said, "Mr. Gallegos?" I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Who's the all-time leading scorer for Pecos?" And they named all these guys. I said, "No, it's Mr. Gallegos. He's the first player to hit 600 and 700 points ever." And so, but nobody knows about Herman Gallegos. In fact, he didn't even know about the program. And so I gave him a copy of the program. And so those are kind of neat stories, I think, hopefully, that I'll be able to share in the book.
And lastly, make your pitch about the book. Tell people why they should get it.
I think if they love the game of basketball and they want to know all the top players and coaches and teams, and then I created stat clubs for scoring and rebound and assist and for teams. And I just gave the NMA 2 pages full of probably about 25 top records ever that are also national records. And so if you love basketball and you love the game of basketball, hopefully. And unfortunately, there's just so many stories from the interviews and that I'm going to end up probably doing a second book, and then hopefully my goal is I've also been doing research in girls basketball. So hopefully by 2023, which will be the 50th anniversary of girls basketball, I'll have a girls basketball book.